Yeah, this is one of the worst things on the internet. Uh,
Yeah,
so
the issue we're having right now.
yeah, so there are even people on Discord who get into like mudslinging fights with other people who barely know anything, purely for the sake of their ego. They don't even really claim that they're trying to like convert the masses to the faith. And even if they did, they wouldn't know what that means, because for a lot of these guys, one religion or another is a set of which, if you presuppose a few facts, so you presuppose that Christianity is true, you presuppose some kind of apostolic Christianity is true, right? If you presuppose something like that, which churches which churches claim to the identity of the Catholic Church ought to fall out of that? And that's really all that they like to argue about. Um, and it's purely it's a discussion. Maybe the people themselves are not devoid of faith. I wouldn't want to say that, but the discussions themselves are totally devoid of faith, and the people who are involved end up making for themselves the very subject matter of religion something which is associated with these egoistic pastimes and sensations, and it gets joined to um, the enjoyment of winning a debate, right? Things like this. And so when you ask them about basic knowledge necessary for the simplest parts of the spiritual life, they know nothing ever, and they don't know how theology factors into the spiritual life either. They think of them as two divergent hobbies, and they've chosen which one they like, right? This is how a lot of these people think. And when you get stuck into this way of behaving, the integrity, the Catholicity of Catholic theology falls apart, because one of the special qualities of Catholic theology is that it's Catholic. That doesn't mean the theology that belongs to Catholics in the Catholic Church. The word Catholic here, when we say Catholic theology, means that our theology is maximally unified. There is an interreferentiality between all the theses that we hold. And that means that there's a special intimacy between our mystical theology, our scientific theology, our moral theology. All of these things are intimately connected to one another because of um, certain important principles, like the nature grace distinction, for example, or the principle of predilection, things like that. But there are various principles that cause the whole of our theology to be interrelated, so that the purpose of learning any theology is for it to be meditated on. Every thesis you learn is a new angle or aspect from which you gaze at the mystery of God revealed in the incarnation and in the incarnational dispensation that He's given us. That's the point of theology. When the majority of somebody's approach to theology is arguing with other people about why their confession is wrong, they have a big problem. They have a big problem, because it means that they are not engaging with theology for its principal end, like for, as their principal occupation with it themselves. And that's one of the reasons. So it's damaging at the individual level, it's damaging to the spiritual life, it's damaging to a particular person approaching theology the way it's supposed to be approached. And secondly, it's damaging for the community, because I've seen so many people, somebody converts, um, what's the phrase they use, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, right? They come in and they got that spark for something more. The reason they're interested in religion is because they have that drive for something more, right? What's the something more? When I was on my thesis fieldwork recently, a few months ago now, one of the guys who was involved in the youth group in that parish, he was talking about how it's really difficult to get people who are cradles, who are turning up for the community and think that this is like a pious thing in and of itself, to get that sense of a desire for something more. When people convert, they initially want that something more. What do I mean? What does he mean by the something more? Well, when you become religious, the religion is a means to an end. And that end is the something more. And that something more is to foster some kind of special relationship with God. There's some kind of joy in the presence of God that you're pursuing, and you realize that you can only find it through Catholicism. You don't necessarily think about that properly. Maybe this is something you couldn't articulate, but it's true. You intuit it. Then once you become Catholic and you get sucked into a community where your options are, okay, either I get on the sacramental conveyor belt and I just do the same thing every week, rinse and repeat, commit the same sins, confess the same sins, go to mass, always make sure I can receive the Eucharist, because otherwise what's the point in going to mass, because that's the routine I've got, right? And then on top of that, you've got these various hobbies. You can be one of these people who argues about scholastic philosophy on the internet. You can be one of these people who shit talks Islam all the time. You can be one of these people who does this. You can be one of these people who does that. Those are your different hobby options now as a Catholic, since you can't do the things you were enjoying yourself with before. What is that? That is, you come into this community and you think, well, there's got to be something more, right? And the whole community that you get yourself into silently says, there is nothing else. You've arrived. Now you just repeat this. Now you just continue doing this, just like us. And so that's what happens when you have these internet communities where everybody debates like this, right? And there are similar problems in real life, but in these internet communities, somebody will be a convert. They'll come into Catholicism looking for the something more. And the people around them will suck them into a culture that stifles that spark that was born in them, that caused them to seek after God in the Catholic religion and through the Catholic religion. And that's one of the reasons why this behavior is so harmful, because it doesn't only affect you, it affects the entire atmosphere of the Catholic communities that you hang out in. And it makes people think that that's what it's supposed to be, that that's normal. So that's what Catholic life is supposed to look like. That's what a Catholic soul is supposed to feel like when you engage with one. And there's nothing else. There's nothing else there. Once that you've made that the underlying principle that holds your group of Catholic friends together, that's what you do together, it's over, basically. You've completely destroyed any kind of drive to develop in the evangelical virtues together. You've completely destroyed any drive to develop in the spiritual fruits enumerated in Galatians 5. You've completely destroyed any drive to understand how grace mobilizes spiritual acts through the gifts of the Holy Spirit. These are the things that you ought to be learning. When you become Catholic, you go, okay, now I know it's true. What do I do with it? You don't go, now I know it's true. Now I have to get as many other people into the same club as possible, right? Of course, you're supposed to evangelize, but the principal way that you evangelize is by proving the cross in your own soul. That's the principal way you do it. Then, by creating a restlessness in the souls of others, then you disprove their errors which they bring you.
Yeah, I think this definitely fits in with some of the difficulties that we've been encountering even among pretty learned Catholics. This has been a problem for very, very many years. This goes all the way back. Some of the difficulties that even like St. Thomas, actually even St. Augustine was dealing with. It's very, very old. But basically, to look at the effects of grace upon nature and how our supernatural end, how the fact that we are called to beatitude affects the way in which we live practically and the way in which we look at morals. Because really, the soul called to beatitude, looking at their various attachments, should not be sort of willing to settle. What I mean by that is to become habitually detached from something, is to enjoy that thing moderately, but be able to, upon the absence of that thing, be able to be content. Really, it's kind of like Job, where Job had all of this stuff. He had a lot of stuff, children, a wife, a lot of property, and he lost all of it. And he said, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away." Job was habitually detached, even among all of his possessions. So grace is calling us. Grace is calling us to beatitude, and that which is first an intention is going to order everything up to beatitude. So how does your life differ because you're called to beatitude, because you have the supernatural end that you become aware of? How does that life differ? Is it a life of ordinary sort of goodness or morality or ordinary ethics? Is it the life of doing good and avoiding evil? Yes, of course, that's contained in it. But because you're called to a higher end, the means must become proportioned to the end. So you're called to higher means as well. And this is why we begin the sacraments. This is why our natural virtues are become modally supernatural by the working of grace. This is why we care about things like the gifts, the fruits of the Spirit, and the Beatitudes, and not only the moral virtues. This is why even the moral virtues, we go further and say the infused moral virtues. This is why we talk about the theological virtues. And this is further why we talk about the counsels and the habitual keeping of the counsels. It all fits in. It all fits in together. And to have this sort of naturalized view of the Christian life isn't going to fill that something more that Hassan talks about. Because really, the spiritual life, because we've been called to beatitude, is a life of complete detachment from self. Because Father Lagrange, in his fantastic work on the three ages of the interior life, he points out something that spiritual writers have been emphasizing, especially St. John of the Cross, for a very long time. And that's that the biggest danger in the spiritual life is egoism. What does he mean by egoism? What he means by egoism is attachment to self. Do you think, because think about all your vices. Think about when you get angry. Why are you getting angry? Because you have a certain attachment. Really, for most people, it's because you have a certain attachment to enjoyment, to a certain enjoyment. That enjoyment becomes separated from you, and therefore your irascible appetite goes into overdrive, trying to get that thing, and you become angry. So fundamentally, what it is it's an attachment to your own enjoyment of something, and the only way to deal with that is through detachment. So this is what we see in the lives of the saints. Father Schrader pointed this out in his tweet. None of the saints, not a single one of the saints, approached the spiritual life as the sort of way of ordinary virtue, completely detached from the councils. Every single one of the saints, the married ones as well, the non-monastics as well. This isn't just a priest and a monk thing. There's not two ways of perfection. There's one way of perfection, which can either be expressed actually or habitually. None of the saints sort of saw their own lives as sort of a way of natural virtue. They really saw their entire lives as a sort of sacrifice of everything in which they enjoyed. So the thing that you're talking, I can't even remember who asked the question, but whoever asked the question, the sort of thing you're getting at is absolutely correct. It's absolutely correct. A lot of the community has suffered from very many vices, and it really all leads back to the fact that there was a restlessness which they kind of approached Catholicism and got to Catholicism, and then just kind of didn't order their lives after what they had reached in the sort of proper view of their end, which is the supernatural end of beatitude, which is going to affect the way in which they order all of their means to that end. It really is a radical life. I mean, it really, if you think about what we're called to, If you look, especially when you look at the lives of the saints, it's insane. It's absolutely insane by nature, of course. For nature to view this is a St. Augustine's whole point against the Platonists and De Vera Religione. The fact that our Lord has called people to chastity is insane. Plato tried to point that this is a higher way of life, and he didn't even keep it himself. So he knew it's insane. The type of fasting and vigils, the type of martyrdom within the church, the conversions, the complete dedication to life, that's insane by nature. Absolutely insane by nature. So when you look at what we've been called to and the means that we've been given, it's insane. It's absolutely insane. But it's something which is a complete fulfillment and perfection of what many have been looking towards, looking for. And really, if you're not willing to engage in those proper means, why are you even here? Like, really, ask yourself, why are you here? Like, for example, people always like, you had the guy a few weeks ago who he posted on Twitter about how his wife had a difficult pregnancy and therefore they couldn't engage in relations without endangering her health. So he decided to go with contraception. He's like, it's sort of impossible not to engage in the marital act. So he felt that contraception was his only option. If you're not willing to give up something which seems to be to do one of the most difficult things in his view, why are you even here? Like, why are you here? You got to ask yourself. It's insane, but do you believe in divine grace? Do you believe in the supernatural end that you've been called to? Do you believe in those things? And how are you ordering your life after those things? That's what you need to ask yourself. Because of course it's going to be difficult. It's obviously going to be difficult. It's impossible actually by nature. But it's possible by grace. Because we're not ordered to some sort of sensual enjoyment. We're not the Saracens. That's not what we believe in. We're ordered to the vision of God. That's what we're ordered to. So obviously, the acts that we make and the development of our spiritual life is going to look insane because we're called to the intimate and intuitive vision of the divine essence. That's insane. That's crazy. But you need to realize that your entire life needs to somehow be ordered from means to end in that way. And that's going to require difficult things. Read the lives of the saints. It's going to require very, very difficult things. And those who suffer, and those who detach, those who do these extraordinarily difficult things that we look at, really those who live their ordinary lives as mothers, as fathers, as children, as husbands, as friends, as brothers, as sisters, those who live their ordinary lives in extraordinary ways, and they suffer the sort of daily abuse that almost everybody is gonna somehow suffer on this earth. And they suffer that in union with the sufferings of Christ and of Our Lady of Sorrows. That is going to be meritorious unto eternal life. So that's the issue. That is the sort of main issue. That's why we talk about something like marital chastity, because your marriages are meant to call you to beatitude. That's what your marriages are for. Your marriages are for eternal life. That's what they're for. And the way in which grace sort of rains down upon matrimony is a means of becoming completely free from attachments. So this is why we get angry when people like Tim Gordon or Timothy Knowles or whoever. That's why we get so upset when they say things that are basically just sort of licit mutual masturbation. That's what that's their sort of view of the marital debt. It's insane.
I don't know. I think I would at least, if I wanted to be like as nice to them as possible, I would say that they remove everything sacred from the sacrament, so that natural marriage and sacramental marriage become equivalent. They become basically the same thing.
Yeah, so it's basically a sort of practical Pelagianism with how we
Mhm.
view marriage. Marriage is just something completely something natural, and it has no sort of connection, intrinsic or extrinsic, to beatitude. And in fact, in this sort of view, marriage would become one of the worst possible things for us to do. Marriage would be, if you were a Catholic called the Beatitude, becoming married would be horrible, and you shouldn't do it ever. Of course, we know the superiority of virginity over marriage, but marriage is a means for people who burn, in order to stop burning. That's the whole point with what St. Paul says, is that marriage is meant to discipline you in chastity and countenance, in order to become like the angels.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the whole problem, I guess, there in a nutshell.
I guess one of the issues is that because we find a natural principle for many of these operations of grace in the sacrament of marriage, people often assume that that's all there is. So, for example, oh well, marriage is supposed to direct you to an eventual life of sexlessness, right, where you stop engaging in intercourse, and people go, oh well, that happens when you get old anyway, or people say, or okay, so marriage is supposed to be a remedy for concupiscence. Oh well, that happens anyway because there's a certain effect of loosing the over restraint through illicit use, which calms down the passions. St. Thomas says, okay, but this happened before. Like this was how it was under the old covenant too. Like it was already instituted for those things before it had these effects by grace. So then what happens by grace? Well, we are able to reach those things in a more eminent way, and not through merely losing the passions, but through gaining uh, a right balance of the passions themselves, and a virtue of continence whereby we no longer need to act according to the passions. So that's supposed to be the aim. I wanted to point out one more mistake with the debate bro stuff, one more negative effect on the community, because I've started coming across this more and more lately. But in a lot of these communities, you have people who are not debate me bros, but because their entire exposure to Catholicism and Christianity in general has been this like debate club team like movement, right? They end up having fostered within them like basically mental illness because of these communities, and the mental illness that they form is this deep epistemic anxiety about the truth of any religious claim. Somebody came to me and he was disturbed by the idea of infallible safety, not because he thought that it might be wrong, but because he thought, oh well, that makes Catholicism so much more falsifiable. Now I'm going to be more anxious about whether or not there's something in history we've overlooked or something like that would disprove Catholicism. Oh, now I'm going to freak out every single day. And then he starts sending me messages every single day about like Freemasonic conspiracy theories and the fake Sister Lucia stuff, everything, anything you can think of. These people are anxious about every single opposing claim to the claims of the church. And they think that they cannot rest until they know a certain answer and rebuttal to every single interlocutor that exists who opposes Catholicism. And we, this community, taken as a whole, did that to these people. I want you to keep this in mind. There are people who cannot peaceably live as Catholics because of us, because of this community that we formed. And we have to do something about this. We have to rip this community away from what it's been doing to what it was supposed to be doing from the beginning. Otherwise, people like this will multiply and we're going to do more harm than good moving forward. We're not supposed to do this. This is not supposed to be what these communities are like. And they're not supposed to produce people who question, not just question everything, but who doubt literally every single claim that the Catholic Church makes just because there is someone out there who has an argument against it that they saw on YouTube or TikTok or Twitter. That's not good. How did this manage to happen? And before somebody says, "Oh, well, that's just like an underlying problem on their side." No. Yeah, in some cases there is some kind of underlying tendency in that direction. But the point is that this community fosters this mentality because all that they talk about are the various different interlocutors and their perspective and what arguments work better against this confession or that confession, and almost always done in an incredibly unsystematic way by people who refuse to go through self-formation systematically from the principles of the Catholic religion onwards. Because most people convert, and right after converting, they want to jump straight into arguing with people on the internet. I can't even explain that. Why would you do that? What is this if your manifestation of that urge to like shout from the rooftops the great thing that you found is to like go on Discord and start arguing with schismatics, like there's something wrong, like deeply wrong with you. And that's not to attack you, it's to say you need to figure out what that is and you need to cut it out right now before you hurt other people, because you are hurting other people.
Okay, so all of you out there, now that you heard that, there's 2 books that you should pick up besides your catechism, because I know if you're probably struggling with this issue, which I know probably the majority of the people watching now are. There's 2 books that normally I recommend for kind of more of systematically forming yourself. This is the first one, Catechism of Mental Prayer. If you haven't read this, read it. It's really quick. Really, these are the easiest possible books that I can give you. Are these 2 that I'm going to recommend? Catechism of Mental Prayer, very good, very easy. It's not going to be confusing for you, and it's going to produce very good fruits. Very, very good. And then the second one, this is from me. I published this, but A Comprehensive Introduction to Scholastic Philosophy and Theology. It's on my Lulu page, which is just it's just lulu.com/spotlight/militant Thomas.